after d4, d5, knight c3, knight f6, bishop f4, white is playing something I think is called the Chigori variation of the Veresov, or something like that. Anyway, this is a very popular move. It is a sideline of the d4 games, because most d4 games will be Queen's Gambit, or London system, or maybe the Catalan with g3, bishop g2. The sideline, but it's still extremely popular. It's played a lot, and you need to know what to do. We've seen a few videos about this. We know we have to play c5 now. And in the past, we went through knight to b5 now. The usual idea of the white player to play knight c7 check, winning the rook. And this is something you have to be careful to. Knight b5 cannot happen now, because queen check, and the knight will be forced back. So white has to play e3 first, so that the bishop defends the knight. And now knight b5 is a threat. It's an annoying move to beat. You can't play queen a5 anymore, because white can just block with c3, and you cannot take the knight. So you're in trouble, and it's an ugly position to play. So after e3, black goes on with a very aggressive and best move, which is bishop to g4, attacking the queen. In the past, we went through knight g to e2, blocking, or bishop to e2, and everything that happens next. In this video, we're going to focus on knight f3, which we haven't seen at all, or f3. Now, f3, let's start with this. f3 with an attack on the bishop. We have seen it in the past. We played bishop to d7 now. And now we went through knight to b5 right now. What to do in this occasion. However, we're going to go through something we haven't seen at all. What to do when white plays bishop to b5. Obviously here you don't want to take this bishop, because knight takes back, and again it's an ugly position. Knight c7 is a threat. You're going to have to play defensive. e6 is the right move now. Let's look at two options. White continuing development to e2, or maybe swapping bishops. Okay, if white continues the development, knight g2, e2, right? Okay, a6, just attack the bishop, forcing a swap. The bishop can't go anywhere. If he goes to a4, b5, bishop moves, and then c4, you're winning a piece. And if instead the bishop goes to d3, c4, you're still winning a piece. So after a6, our opponent is forced to take us. And now we take back with the knight. And after castle, knight to h5 attacks the bishop. And the position is already much better for black. The bishop will have to retreat. Now you can take, now you might argue that white can take back with the knight, but this knight will have nowhere to go that makes sense. And now black continues with h5. This is already a very strong threat. Black cannot just play this move like e4 to try and attack the center, considering that our king is in the center, because then he will take the pawn in d4 for free with an attack of the knight. The queen can't take back, because bishop c5 wins the queen, he pins the queen to the king. So instead of e4, what if the knight goes back? Because you see, you're about to play h4, this is too strong. And white cannot play h4 to stop that, because he will just take it. So knight g to e2, once again, bishop to d6. And now, is e4 possible? It seems so, but you're going to take it e4, knight takes back. And now queen to b6, pinning the knight. And also attacking the pawn in b6, with an attack on the other knight. So obviously rook b1 to stop the attack of the queen on the pawn in b2 doesn't make sense, because e5 wins a piece. The knight is pinned. So instead of that, what if king to h1, I'm pinning. Okay, bishop to e5, double attack on the knight. The knight will have to move, knight to b3. Seems like now everything is safe. We won't even be able to take in b2. However, we take in c3. Pawn takes back. And now you take this pawn. Pawn takes back. And now rook to c8. And white has an isolated pawn, two isolated pawns, another isolated pawn. Our pawn structure instead is perfect. And we're targeting weaknesses. This cannot be defended in any way. If queen to d4 to defend it and developing the queen, this seems to be making sense. But you can just take. If pawn takes, then you're taking in c2. If knight takes, then you're taking in c3. And in this position, after rook to c8, instead of queen d4, what if rook to b1? Putting the rook on the safe file of our queen. Okay, you just ignore it. Play rook to c3. This knight has no discover attacks that make any sense. Knight to d4, fine. Queen to c7. And black has a great advantage. And back in this position, after the bishop just gone to g3, and we took it, what if the pawn takes back and white says, you know what, I'm going to be able to move my knight to squares that look a little bit better. And yeah, but that's ugly, because you will play queen to c7, Let's see, let's make an example. And obviously you have an idea of playing h5 and so on. So if white plays queen to d3, right? Now obviously, as you know, as I say in all of my videos, it's not like these exact moves will have to happen, but it's not about memorization of moves. It's about, you see, you recognize the pattern, understand what the plan is, and since you know what the plan is, the chances are that your opponent will either play the perfect move or whatever, anything else he does that is not covered in this video. That means it's such a bad move that it wasn't even worth seeing. So what you do is you work out from there and you take it from there. Queen to d3, the idea is very simple, developing the queen. Could have been queen to d2, it wouldn't have made any difference. Here you just castle long. And after e4 by white, the idea of the white player, we can also look at a pawn like king to f2, the idea of bringing the rook to the open file. Obviously e4 loses immediately because you will just take this pawn. Queen can't take back because of bishop c5, winning the game. Knight to d4, and you will just play knight to e5. And when the queen goes to d2, bishop c5 wins the game. You might ask yourself why. I mean, the knight is defended by the queen. Besides, it's white to move anyway. Well, you see, let's see, for example, knight a4 attacking the bishop, bishop a7, keeping the pin. c3 cannot be played to defend the knight so that the queen can move freely because b5 traps the white knight. So instead of that, what if b3 by white, with the idea of playing c4 and open the files for the rooks to come on the open file? Well, that is the point that you missed. Pawn takes in e4, and now there's double attack on this knight. Cannot be defended in any way, shape or form. So in this position, after bishop c5 pinning the knight, why is this pin so effective? What if knight to e2 defending? Again, take this pawn. And when the pawn takes back, knight c4 wins the game. Because you're attacking the queen will have to move, but you'll be able to play e5. And then the knight is pinned and it will be taken. What if the queen goes to c3? Attacking the knight. Well, e5 anyway. And the queen can't take the knight because after bishop takes with check, you're winning the queen. So let's take it from the start. d4, d5, knight c3, knight f6, and the variation with bishop to f4. Okay, c5, e3, bishop g4, f3, bishop d7, and now we're looking at the novelty, which is bishop to b5, e6. Don't trade that bishop. And earlier we went through knight g2, e2, developing. What about bishop swapping with us? Okay, take back with the knight. It's important to take back with the knight because otherwise, if you still have a knight in b8, then knight b5 is a very annoying threat. So knight to d7. And now two moves. One of them, knight to b5 now. What to do? Okay, no problem. You can play queen a5 check. And now you can't block with the pawn because then you lose the knight. So the knight is forced back to c3. Knight to h5 attacks the bishop. The bishop moves. Knight to b6 is the best move now. Bishop f2, saving the bishop from the threat of this knight taking it. Okay, knight to c4, that was our idea. We wanted to go to the square b2 potentially. And this is the tactic to remember, this positional situation. Knight to b6, going to c4, putting pressure on b2 because of the pressure of c3. So knight to c3. And now, there's nothing to do here. If white pushes the pawn, you win the knight with check. White can't really move the knight, it's pinned, and even if it defends it, you're still gonna take in b2. Let's make an example. If white plays rook to b1, you take it. Rook takes and then queen check, right? So obviously, this is nonsense. And in this position, after knight c4, right, what about knight to e2, defending this knight, so the knight b2 isn't really a threat. Okay, well, take this pawn first. Pawn takes back, and now knight to b2 is a big problem for white, because where are you going to put the queen? If you play the queen to d2, you're going to get pinned, and there's also a bishop potentially coming, and the knight attacking you again. If instead you move the queen to c1, you've got ideas like, you've got knight to a4 winning the game. Because now you've got too much attack on this square. You also potentially playing bishop b4. You're winning because of too much pressure on that square. The queen can't go to b2 to defend it. d2 doesn't make sense because you're going to play bishop b4. So if instead, okay, the best move according to the engine after knight to b2 attacking the queen is queen to b1, but now you play bishop to a3. And the position is horrible. White can't move a thing. What about, okay, castle. Well, castle. And finally, white can play knight to d1 now. The knight is no longer pinned, and he can threaten to take this knight. At least now we're forced to make a swap. But we refuse and play knight to c4. Position evaluated as if black was up a piece. And you don't have to worry about this pawn getting taken, simply because rook a to b8 wins the game. You're attacking the queen. The queen is forced to the only square, which is c6, and now rook to b6. Well, that's actually not the only square. c6, rook b6 wins the game. Queen to e2 seems to be another option, but knight to f6. So let's take it from the start so we can close this line. Bishop f4, c5, e3, bishop g4, f3, bishop d7, and bishop b5. e6, don't swap the bishop. Bishop takes, knight takes. Now let's not look at knight b5 because it's wrong. What about development? Knight g2, e2. Remember that the knight in the d4, d5 games with the pawn in e3, the knight is supposed to reach the square e5. And that can only be reached from f3. So knight f3 would be the ideal square. So bishop g4 is a nice provocation of f3. We're going to look at knight f3 later on. So knight g2, e2 is misplaced. Knight to h5 attacks the bishop. Oh, and by the way, instead of bishop g3, we are going to look at bishop g3, but what about bishop e5? Now here, we just win the pawn by playing queen to e5, and we want to clean pawn up because we're taking in e5 with 2 pieces. We also have an attack on g2 and potentially f3 later. The queen doesn't get trapped in that square. And here, so f4 is not possible, right? Here, the best move according to the engine is g4, which kicks the knight away. And here we take in d4. We don't have to worry about the pawn taking us, because then we have an attack on the free bishop. So what if the bishop retreats to d5 to d4? Now our knight is still under attack, but we can take with check. The bishop cannot block, and we will take our opponent's right to castle away. Because you see, the thing is, can't block in g3 because we got double attack on it, right? We got 2 pieces attacking whilst the pawn is pinned, so we got an attack on the rook. King to f1 loses the right to castle. He will play knight h to f6, and you will have to take it from here. If instead our opponent, instead of king f1, goes king to d2, again, knight h to f6. And now that the queen is in some ugly position, queen to e1, looking for a swap of queens, and then play on a completely equal game. Or at least reducing our initiative and removing the queens from the board, considering that this king is a bit ugly. Crazy enough, we do accept the trade, and after rook takes back, e5 traps a piece, and this is inevitable. If g5 counterattacking on this knight, remember you're attacking this bishop and then the knight as well, and that will come with check. And in this position earlier, just a few moves ago, when we took in d4, if the bishop doesn't take back in order to keep protecting this diagonal, the diagonal of the check, where we threaten to misplace the white king, what if white takes back with the pawn? Fine, still you give a check. And now here, this cannot be blocked by the knight. Because, remember, you have 2 attackers. Yes, in this case, white will have an extra defender, which is the bishop, but you can just take it. You remove the defender. And now you're threatening to just win this knight for free. So white will have to take your knight in h5. And now queen to d4 just capitalizes on the game. This cannot be taken because of knight f3. And black pawns are going to destroy the white players soon enough. So in this position, after the check, what if instead of blocking with the knight, white blocks with the bishop? Fine, just take it. This obviously cannot be taken back with the pawn because of the rook. So the knight will have to take back. And now h5. And look, position evaluated -2. So even after playing a very solid variation, white just doesn't have any idea, any plan how to continue. It's a very dull position, and we're about to open everything. So queen e2 with the idea of castling long side, for example, you will just take this pawn. And pawn takes back means you will just take this knight. Check. Pawn takes back, but now you're taking this rook and you're taking the other one as well. And this is completely winning for black. And just a couple of moves ago, if white plays g5, in order not to let us open all the files on the opponent king side, okay, bishop to d6. And now again, we got double attack on the knights. King to f2, queen to g5. Completely winning position. Let's take it from the start for the last time. And so c5, e3. Bishop g4, f3, bishop d7, bishop b5, e6, bishop takes, knight takes, knight e2, knight h5. So earlier we went through bishop e5. What about bishop to g3? Rook to c8, the open file. Bishop f2, saving the bishop from the threat of that knight. Pawn takes, bishop d6, castle, a6. And black is better. Also because this c pawn is weak, you've put the knight in front of it. So knight to g3, let's look at this move. This type of idea, how to deal with it. We refuse the swap. Knight h2, f6. Obviously f4 with the idea of f5 doesn't work because this is just a free pawn. So after queen to d3, developing h5. This is the plan we're going for. Rook f2 e1, putting the rook on the same file of our king. Queen to c7, doubling down on the good diagonal. Rook a to d1, finishing development, h4. And now a move like knight to e2, you just take the pawn in h2, completely winning position. If white plays knight to f5, exploiting the pin in e6 and attacking this bishop, you're still going to take here. King moves. Or let's actually king f1. King f1 now. The best move is king to f8, unpinning. We don't want a castle because the rook wants to be on this file. Now we are unpinning the pawn and we're threatening to take the knight. Knight to h4. Bishop to g3 wins the game. There is nothing here because the knight is trapped. And if bishop takes and then the queen takes back, the knight remains trapped. If the knight moves away, knight g6, check. This could be an idea. Take back. And now rook e6. Doesn't work because rook check. So you don't have to worry about that sacrifice. King e2. Take this rook. And now if king takes then you're winning a free bishop. If knight takes, then you play queen takes in c2, winning a pawn and devastating position. Checking, winning everything, winning also the bishop in f2. So after queen takes, the only move to take, but still, you will play king f7, rook will have to move, and now bishop to f4, attacks the rook again. Rook to d3, looks like white survived, however, g5. And our opponent has no moves. g3 is not a problem. You give a check first, the king moves, and then you go double attack over g3. You do already. g4 doesn't work to stop the pawn because rook h8, and then you're going to go to h2, you're pinning this bishop, and the game plays itself. So what about bishop to e3, trying to remove this monster of a bishop from this square, where rook to e8 pins it. Fine, king to f2, unpinning it. The thing is that white cannot make a move. There are no moves. Position has been evaluated -5 for a long time. Knight to b6 comes now, and that's going to be how we capitalize on this game. We're going to go to c4, we're going to finalize the attack. What about the bishop takes? That's fine, take back. White doesn't have a move, rook e3 doesn't work, it's too much attack on it. The queen can't go to this file because of the queen. What about g3, attacking the queen? Doesn't work because knight g4 check wins the game. You see, if the king goes to g2, you play knight e3 check. The rook takes, so you take back, you win the exchange. If not, you're also attacking this queen anyway. If the king goes anywhere else, remember you can take stuff. So king f1, same thing. King to g1, you can take this pawn with check. So what about instead of g3, what if white plays knight to e2, attacking the queen? Okay, well, same thing, knight g4. And now king g1 is a suicide, as you can see. King to f1 again runs into knight e3. So you might argue, what if king to g1? Fine, just swap everything and you're up material. After all the swaps, you're going to play with the extra knight.